This is a live coding. It's about the scariest thing any developer can do. So let's have fun together, right? Relax. We've got 50 minutes. So where are we heading? So this is a talk called Baking Domain Concepts into Code. So the emphasis in this talk is, as best as I can, to try to demonstrate how do we make domain-driven design real in code. And I like to call that modeling in code, right? Like, how are we modeling in the code, expressing the model, the concepts, the terminology in the code itself. And so part of that will be tying in some event storming and event storming timeline, and I'll explain what that is. But to show how sometimes going beyond the code and doing some domain modeling with someone that is an expert in the business domain can really help us in terms of what we put in the code. So we're going to talk about making implicit concepts explicit, and we're going to be refactoring code as we go through this. I mentioned domain modeling with event storming. If we have time, I'll do a little demo of refactoring towards a value object, for those of you that may be not familiar with the concepts. Who's familiar with value objects? Oh, okay, well, this might be the wrong audience for that. Okay, what about domain events, implementing domain events? All right, so we'll see where we go. So let's dive right in, okay? So I want you to imagine that you're joining me on a development team, and this is a team that works on extended warranties, okay? So what are extended warranties? Well, I want you to imagine that you've purchased a dishwasher or a refrigerator or some other kind of large appliance, and when you purchase the product at the checkout, they say you've got a 3-month manufacturer's warranty, so if anything goes wrong with this product, or sorry, 3 years, you've got 3 years, and anything goes wrong, we'll repair it for free. And they say, but after the 3 years, you're not covered anymore. Would you like to buy an extended warranty for another 3 years that will cover you, so you'll have a total of 6 years coverage, and maybe you pay 30, 40, 50 euros for an extended warranty, right? So it seems like a good deal if you're buying $1,000 for an appliance. So that's kind of the background on this. And I want you to imagine that we have been asked to fix some code. There's been some problem where we're doing a lot more repairs than we should be. And we're also noticing that some of the extended warranties dates seem incorrect from time to time. So we're going to go on a journey of discovery through this code and trying to figure out what's going on. So I want you to imagine that we got together with somebody that's an expert in this warranty process, and we did a little bit of event storming with them, where we worked through an example. Can you see that up in the back in terms of the letters? I can make it a little bigger. We worked through an example of the process of how these extended warranties work, right? And I'll let you read through. I'm not going to go through it all in detail, but imagine that there's a dishwasher and that somebody actually purchased this dishwasher and did not buy an extended warranty at the time of checkout, but then they got a mailing in, they got a letter in the mail later that offered them the extended warranty, and so they decided to purchase it. And then once they purchase the extended warranty, the warranty now is in a pending state until it's effective, and it becomes effective after the manufacturer's warranty expires, right? That makes sense. So it goes from pending, hits the effective date, and becomes active, right? And then it's active for, say, 3 years, and then the expiration date is reached and becomes expired. And that's the happy story, right? Because that's money coming in for the extended warranty for a company and no money going out the door, right? So that's the simplest case. So you can see here, I'll just tell you come through to the end of the story, right? So we hit the extended warranty effective date, the contract is activated, the extended warranty expiration date, and the extended warranty is expired, okay? And one of the questions that came up in the event storming session with our claims person was that there seems to be a little bit of a confusion around the language, right? So the business calls it extended warranties, or part of the business does, but the development team seems to call them contracts, and some of the people call them contracts as well. So what we're going to find in the code is that it talks about contract, but it means extended warranty, Okay, so I just want you to be aware of that. So if we go back to the code, we have this contract entity, this contract object, right? And it has a bunch of details. It has a purchase price. It has the covered product. So let's look at product. Product here, what does that seem to refer to? What is the product for the extended warranty? Any ideas? The appliance, the dishwasher, right? In fact, if we look at the test for contract, you can see here's a sample test here. Now, I want you, as you're looking at this code, I don't want you to think, oh, this is the way Paul is telling us to write DDD-styled code. There's problems with this code. The tests aren't all that great. I'm just giving a little bit of a code sample. You have to imagine there's a much larger system behind this, so I'm not going to show you any database stuff or application services or anything like that. You can see we've got this nice little product object here that we're setting up. So that's the dishwasher. So it has, what is it? Its serial number, like brand, make, model, and then we pass that through to the contract. Okay, so that's what we mean by product. And then we've got other details about the contract, such as the purchase date, and then those two dates we just talked about, the effective date and the expiration date, right? So these are key driver dates for us. And there's some problems with some of this. If you look here, you'll notice, for example, that even if you're not familiar with Ruby, I'll try to explain things for the non-Rubyists in the room. So add a reader means it's read-only, right? You can't change it once it's set up. Add or accessor means it creates accessor methods so you can change it. So we have this bit of a situation here where the purchase price can't be changed and the covered product can't be changed, but these dates can at any time, right? So there's nothing right now in the code to stop somebody from changing the effective date of a contract after the contract has been set up. So that's a little bit of a worrying thing. Now, there's not a lot in the contract at the moment. We just have a contract. You'll see a contract has claims associated with it. If I was to diagram that out on the Miro board here, you would see it looks like this. We have a one-to-many relationship between contract and claim. And if I was to include the covered product in there, we would just add it that way. And I've marked contract and claim as entities, like just by coloring them black on this diagram. So that means they have an identifier and they have a life cycle. They change state over time. Whereas covered product here, like I asked you earlier about value objects, a value object describes or measures something, it has no unique ID, and it's immutable. So you'll notice when we go back to product here, we have a constructor. Everything is an adder reader, and we have a constructor, but there's no other modifying methods in here. Now, Ruby lets you do just about anything with metaprogramming, you know, but it would be a little bit like if you were to change these through metaprogramming, that would be like breaking into someone's house and messing with their stuff, right? So we wouldn't want to do that. So then the question becomes, well, how do claims work? How do we add claims to contracts? What does that look like? And so we've got this service here called claims adjudication, all right? So what I want you to do is turn to the person next to you, and for a minute, I just want you to talk about what makes this hard to understand. So just for a minute, person next to you, what makes this hard to understand? Go. All right, that's time. Okay. Time. Okay, let's hear from a few people. What makes this hard to understand? Anyone? The adjudication. What on earth is adjudication, right? Like if I was writing this as a good developer, right, it's obvious what this does to me, right? this should be claims validation, right? And this should be called validate, right? Because that's what it's doing. What do you think about that idea? It's better, but validation, we asked our claims person, what do you call it when you validate claims from a business perspective? And they said, oh, that's called adjudication. That we adjudicate claims, we don't validate them. Oh, okay. So then, as annoying as it is to have the word validation, adjudication, this is the word that we should probably use, right? And we didn't really understand it, so we made sure we put some documentation in the code about what adjudication means, because it's not exactly obvious, right? Socialize that amongst the development team. So I actually see this as a positive thing from a DDD perspective, right? Validation is a very broad word and it's a good word, but if there's a more narrowly focused business term, let's use it, right? So that's a positive. All right, so put that one to bed. What else? What else makes this hard? Someone? 0.8. 0.8. What on earth is that, right? Magic numbers? What else? Yes?
Change and the value that is received as parameters.
These coming in as parameters?
Yeah, and it's changed state.
It does change state here, yeah. This one?
But it is not a style that I like.
Yeah, that's not great. Like I said, lots of problems with this. What else? That's good? Yes?
Extract a lot of these in a different function with a name.
Yeah. What on earth is, like, so there seem to be two things at least going on in this conditional statement, right? So what is this concerned with? No idea. If the contract is valid at the moment. So when we ask somebody from the business, what do you call it? Because we're using the word valid again. What does validity mean for a contract? What is this? It's checking the life cycle of the contract, right? We said contract is an entity. We're checking the life cycle. So what do you call it when the contract is, you know, so one thing is, well, it's active, right? So we're checking to see if it's active. But, you know, maybe we could say, well, the contract is in effect, right? Is the contract in effect for this new claim failure date that's coming in? So one thing we could do, is we could, there's probably a better term for this, but, you know, we could create some kind of method called in effect for, right? And then we could pass in these here, down to here. Now, what do we need to pass in? It looks like we need the contract, and we could say failure date, right? So if we're going to do that, we really want to make it more like this, and then potentially, well, let's do one thing before we actually make any breaking changes. Okay, we're green, right? Thanks for keeping me accountable, nobody. All right, so let's replace this. All right. Man, you know, when VS Code wants to help, but it's not helping. All right, so in effect for the contract, and then we need the new claim failure date, right? All right, what do you think, green? All right, so we're green, okay? So we've extracted out this idea now that we've at least separated out the logic around in effect for, right? Something that's a little weird about this to me is we said earlier when we looked at the EventStorming timeline down here, it seemed like the only thing that was important was whether or not we were between these two dates, the effective date and the expiration date. So why on earth do we also have to check this?
The fact that you have two parameters not related to each other. I can have a contract and I can have a new claim. Maybe they are about a different partnership.
Yeah, maybe.
Where is the connection? Yeah.
Where is the connection? Yeah. So that's very insightful. There are certain things that are going to come up to you that don't make sense in this, and some of them I'm going to say, that's great, because that's a segue into what we're going to talk about, and other things I'm going to have to say, yeah, that's bad, that's a problem for another day with this.
Missing from the EventStorming form, you telling the story saying, oh, by the way, I have here an open contract.
Right.
So my starting point is the
Not the claim.
Not a claim or not an empty form.
Yeah. Well, so imagine that we went to someone from the business who's an expert, not just in warranty administration, but claim processing, and we asked them, well, how does this flow work, right? So fast forward, we've got a timeline from that session, and you can see that we've got something comes into claims processing when the product stops working and the customer calls the client call center. And then we've got just kind of this standard flow. It creates a repair purchase order that's then sent to a third-party company, right? Somebody else's responsibility. And then it comes back in at the other end, and based on the repair that was performed, which would be like tracking the cost of the repair, so what was maybe the soap dispenser, what would be the cost of the soap dispenser if that was replaced, and what would be the cost of the labor. So labor and parts is what would get updated in the purchase order. And then the claim should be closed. And then right now we have this adjudicated claim here, which seems to me like, why would you do that at the end of the process rather than much earlier, right? But this is the way this kind of thing works. I mean, have you ever done this kind of modeling with someone from the business and they say, well, yeah, this is the way the process is right now. And you're like, wow, okay, this could be so much better. But what we're doing here is we're modeling the as-is process, and we're learning as we're going. So you see that the orange sticky notes are capturing what happened in the story, right? What happened in this process. And then we're using these pink or red stickies for questions that came up. And then we're also using these yellow ones to capture definitions, right? What is a CSR? They're a customer service representative. So then the question becomes, how is it possible for a contract to be within those dates and yet not active? Like, what is that case? How is that?
You had up here a pending state. It's not showing right now, but there's a pending state that has to be approved, and he has to pay for it.
Right. So that's another thing, is if the contract is in a pending state, then that's one case. So that's great, right? Is we don't want to put ourselves in a situation where we're adding claims to contract that's in a pending state. My assumption is that there's some logic in here that says that some code somewhere else that when we hit the effective date, it moves the contract from pending to active, right? That my hope is there's some application service that's doing that.
If it's paid.
Right. But here's what the experts said. They said, well, there's one case where we have done either too many repairs or the repairs to date have been too expensive, and we want to protect ourselves from that case. So what if somebody buys a $1,000 dishwasher and it costs $500 to repair the soap dispenser? We don't want to, we don't want to get ourselves in a situation where we're just a spiral of doom, right, doing repair after repair. So we have this legal concept, which is part of the reason why we call them contracts rather than just warranties, of a limit of liability. We're only liable for a certain amount, and it's supposed to be a percentage of the purchase price, right? And so what we need to do is keep track of the amount of claims, all the claim amounts, total them up, make sure that that doesn't exceed this percentage of the purchase price. And if it does, we want to pull the ripcord and get out of this. And so what we typically do, and this right now has to be done manually, we terminate the contract. When we terminate the contract needs to be marked as fulfilled. When the contract is marked as fulfilled, then we go through this process of actually reimbursing the customer through a store credit. Okay, and this is what we call customer reimbursement. Okay, so you'll see down here, the team was good at capturing that definition of limit of liability. So when we come back to here, what does this look like to you? It's the limit of liability, right? So we would need to validate that with a business expert, but let's capture that, right? So we'll extract this out. Limit of liability. It's that joke, I live like I type, fast and with a lot of mistakes. All right, thank you. I'm here till Wednesday. All right, so we'll replace this. It's not just enough to call it though, we have to pass in something. What do we need to pass in here? Help me out.
The contract.
Contract, thank you. All right, so let's pass in the contract. On the tests. Okay, so we're green. All right, so now we've got this service that we've isolated and encapsulated some of this logic and we've given it a name, right? Very small changes. Now it says if the new claim amount is less than the limit of liability for the contract and the contract is in effect for the new claim failure date, then add the claim, right? We've embedded that. Imagine a developer coming into this service now, joining the team. Now they've got this rich language around adjudication, limit of liability, and is the contract in effect? Because we've isolated out these two responsibilities. But then here's the question, where do these responsibilities belong? Do they belong here in the domain service? Think about this for a moment. What this means is that these three lines, anywhere in the system that has to check the life cycle of a contract, they have to remember to include this. If they don't, then any contract that gets terminated because of a limit of liability being exceeded is going to show as active when it's not. Okay, so think about that. Could be hundreds of places in the code. So where do these two responsibilities, limit of liability and in effect for, belong? What do you think? Based on the objects I've shown you so far. Contract, yeah. All right, so let's move them. All right, let's move them. So we've got contract test here. Is that still readable? Is it too small? All right, thank you. The people that said that's fine, I'm believing you. You're sitting in the front. All right. Up the back. Is it readable up the back? Okay, so here's the thing. We've got a product, we've got a contract, and we want to be able to know if it's in effect, right? So what we probably need is assert true, and we want something like contract in effect for, and the question is, when is the contract in effect? Well, this is the effective date, so the contract has to be in effect for the effective date, right? A test fails. It should fail because we haven't created the method in contract yet, so let's create the method in contract to support that. So we'll come down here. We're doing this baby steps. And we'll just call it date in here. Because contract really, it's just a general date that we're passing in. So we're green. No, we're not. Why are we not green? Because...
You have two tests with the same name. Is this okay?
Thank you. That's what I love about mob programming, right? All right, so now I've broken it even more. Yeah, so where's the syntax error? In contract, let's see. Thank you. See, this is the power of the mob ensemble. Thank you. All right, so we're not done though, right? We've got this logic here. So let's move the logic from claims adjudication. And let's start with just this logic. All right. Okay, so save that. That should work, right? What's that? Let's see, thank you. Variable in contract. Yes, look at this. Okay, so failure date, thank you. This is why we write tests and why we get help. Okay, so failure date needs to be date. And if you're familiar with Ruby, we need to be using the effective date and the expiration date that are properties of the contract rather than pulling them in. So Thank you. All right, we're green. So that covers that case, but that's not the only case, right? So the contract should not be in effect prior to the effective date, all right? And then it should also be in effect on the expiration date, right? But then what about after the expiration date? After the contract has expired? Right. We would have to validate these with our business expert, but it should look like that, right? And that actually is kind of interesting because this event storming timeline here, this implies that these are happening at the same time. But really what we're saying is that we hit the expiration date and then it's the next day that, that it's actually expired, right? Okay, so let's run the test. Okay, so we're green. Now here's where something interesting happens, right? So if we move this logic in, what would you expect? Right, first one passes. I have to do the same thing I did before. Use the property. First one passes because it's always going to be false because the contract's in a pending state by default. So let's, for the purposes of this test, contract status equals active, right? And we should be back to green, okay? Right, so now we've got our test contract is in effect. It's the same logic as in claims adjudication. So we should be able to just come in here now and say contract in effect for, run that. Thank you. All right, so now we can get rid of this. All right, so we've moved this responsibility now over into contract. What about limit of liability? Should be the same, right?
It fails when the contract is not active. Have an explicit test.
Yeah, so we could add an explicit test, right, in here about making sure that it does fail if the contract is... It gets tricky, right? Because if we say something like this, then that should...
Why don't split the test?
We could split the test.
Say, it's always false when contract
Mm-hmm. That's a good idea.
and
So this is a publicly available repo, so you can do all this stuff in your own time. I got 50 minutes, so like I said, not going to be able to solve everything, but I'm tracking with you. And I'm glad that you're tracking with me too. So let's move limit of liability as well. So we'll just copy test contract is in effect, and we'll say test contract limit of liability. Why am I paying so much attention to the language of the business? Because this is really at the heart of what domain-driven design is about, right? The subtitle of Eric's book is Tackling Complexity in What? Does anyone remember? In the heart of software, right? This is the heart of the software, right? The actual software itself. There's tremendous value in strategic design and all of that. And you might look at this and say, well, these are just simple, straightforward, everyday refactorings, but this is the power of marginal gains. Like, I haven't changed the behavior of the system yet, but I'm making marginal gains. I'm making improvements along the way. So what we want to be able to do here is assert something about the contract limit of liability. All right? What we don't really know, I'm not really sure what the limit of liability value should be at the moment for the contract. Let's at least run this and see what we get. We should see a test that says undefined method limit of liability. So we can go to contract now and we can at least create that. Right, and now we'll get a failing test because it'll return nil instead of 100. Right, so then let's make that pass. Okay, so now we've got a passing test, but it's not the limit of liability logic that we want yet. So let's move that over. All right. And purchase price is now inside of contract. Claims is inside of contract, so we'll get them from the properties. Now if we run this, it fails, but it fails for the right reason now. It's failing because we're asserting a value of 100, but what we're actually getting is 80. Why are we getting 80? There's no claims. It's this horrible little thing that Abraham pointed out. So we've got this limit of liability language, so let's at least make a marginal improvement. That's probably not the best name for that constant. Yeah, what should we call it?
Proportion, ratio.
Okay, thank you. So now we have this, and we have this case. Now, what I just did was what Michael Feathers would call a characterization test, right? I put in a value that I guessed was incorrect, and then I ran the actual code to get what the real value is. So I'm running a characterization test to figure out what this is, and then I'm just validating it by saying, well, if claim total is 0 and the purchase price is 100, that's this, then I would expect to see a value of 80 in here because of this calculation. So then let's change this to 80, and we've got a passing test now. This isn't the only case though. Like, we also need to handle the case where we have a contract that has a claim. All right, so let's go to maybe the claims adjudication test and see if there's an example of creating a claim. Here's one, let's use that. And 79 is pretty high if we've only got initial limit of liability of 80, so we'll make it 50. So then what would you expect this number to be? Test is going to fail, it's not going to be 80. Any guesses? All right. Who says 30? Who says something else? Who's too scared to put their hand up? All right. Thank you. All right, so something wrong with the code today. I don't know what it is. Oh, it's 40. All right, let's go back to contract. So we're totaling up the claims, which is going to be 50, 80. Yeah, the ratio is on this. Yeah. So here's the interesting thing is we talked with the business expert and they're like, this is not right. This calculation isn't right. Why are we factoring in the amount of claims into the limit of liability? This is not correct. It's like, oh. All right, let's see. Let's at least get the test passing and then we'll come back to that because that seems problematic. So the amount here should be 40. Okay, so we're green. Let's finish doing what we're doing, which was moving this method over to contract. So let's finish at least doing that. So we've now got the method in contract. So if we go to claims adjudication now, we should be able to do the same thing we did before. Move contract, so now we have this. All the tests pass. Yay! All right. Now, this looks looking a lot better, right? If the contract limit of liability is not exceeded by the new claim amount, and the contract is in effect for the new claim failure date, now we're going to add the claim. Now, we've already said there's more that could be done with this, but we're going to run out of time if we try to do that. So we've moved this over. Now, anywhere in the code that we need to access the life cycle of the contract or the limit of liability, we can ask the contract for that, right? So single responsibility principle on these things now. So then the question becomes, we've got a little bit of a problem here with this calculation, right? what it actually should be, what this is really expressing, it seems, is this is actually the remaining limit of liability. And this is something to do with the limit of liability. So before we change the method name, let's go back to the tests. So what we were saying here was that it should really be 80, and then if the claim amount is 50, it should be 30, right? And then if we were to have another claim here that was maybe 10, what would we expect the limit of liability to be? 20? All right, that doesn't pass. So if we come back in here and we look at this, then what if we did something like this? Now we're passing. We have the correct calculation. We found one of the bugs in here. And when we look at this, it's like, wow, this isn't really the limit of liability. This is the remaining limit of liability based on the total of the claim amounts. So let's fix that everywhere that shows up. And in here. Oops. Okay, so we're asserting equal. We probably did not save the contract. Okay, so now we've got limit of liability, and then what we could create is just a limit of liability method here, not limit of liability ratio, that contains this amount. Something like that. And then we'll move the ratio. You know, that normally would go up the top of the Ruby file, but let's just put it here just for readability for us. Okay, so we've made a lot of very small changes, but is it becoming more readable to you, right? More clear in terms of the domain concepts? And it's actually correct now. The logic is correct. Before it was off. And one of the things I notice is that if you imagine going back to that original claims adjudication service and trying to find out where the bug is when you don't even know that it's connected to the limit of liability, that's a really hard trick to pull off because you don't even know what you're looking at. I mentioned at the beginning, a lot of domain modeling is taking things that are implicit and making them explicit, right? So that's what we're doing here. When something is implicit, what it means in terms of the way you read the code is the intention of the code is obscured. Right? It's hard to know what the intention of the code is because these different responsibilities are not named and they're not combined in a meaningful way. So the other thing that I mentioned is a little problematic here is, you know, if I move purchase price down, maybe to be a little bit clearer. These are all things that should not change. Once you purchase a contract, its purchase price, the purchase price doesn't change, the purchase date doesn't change, the effective date, expiration, they don't change, they're immutable, right? So we talked with the claims expert about this, the warranty expert, and they said, what do you call these things? What do you call these dates? You know, the price that, he said, well, let's get an actual contract and look at it. So we got one of the extended warranty contracts and we looked through it, and there's a paragraph called terms and conditions. And in that paragraph, all these things are spelled out. All these dates, the relationship between them. So, and in fact, the limit of liability was in that terms and conditions as well. So, wouldn't it be nice then is we had something like this. We're passing in the product completely. What if we had something like this? Terms and conditions equals terms and conditions dot new. And we passed in everything here except the product, right? So everything related to the terms and conditions. So it's the purchase price, the purchase date, the effective date, expiration date. And then wouldn't it be wonderful if we were able to say something like this, contract equals contract.new, terms and conditions, and product. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Right? let's do that, okay? Let's make a terms and conditions object. So we have product, and I said product is a value object, right? So let's use this as a starting point for terms and conditions. So we'll take product and we'll call it terms and conditions. And then we have 4 properties. Does anyone remember what they are for terms and conditions? There's purchase price. Thank you, purchase date. Ah, beautiful, effective date. And last one? Expiration date, fantastic. All right, and then we'll call it terms and conditions. All right, so there's our terms and conditions class. Now, if we go back to, don't need product anymore. If we go back to here, that test should still pass, right? Because we're not using terms and conditions at the moment, and we just created terms and conditions. So it doesn't pass, though. Why doesn't it pass? Because it doesn't know what to do with this terms and conditions. It's not pulling it in from anywhere. So we need to do the same thing that we did for product, is add it as a dependency on the contract. Terms and conditions, okay? And now we're green. Years ago, I went to a talk, it's about 2011, I think, that kind of time frame in Atlanta. And Joshua Kerievsky, he's the author of the book Refactoring to Patterns, which I highly recommend. He gave a talk called The Limited Red Society. And it was a talk about when you're writing tests, when you're doing TDD like I'm doing here, try to minimize the amount of time you spend with failing tests. I mean, how much time have I spent with failing tests? Just enough to, like, I write a failing test and then I write just enough code to make it pass and then I go from there, right? So here's the thing, like what we're going to do right now is we're actually, if we want to change the initializer for contract to this, from this, we're going to break every place that this initializer is called. Now, we could kind of work our way there. You know, one way to do it would be to say, well, let's just update it for now and pass in the terms and conditions into the existing contract and update all the initializers. That would be one way of doing it. But that's still going to leave us with a bunch of broken tests for a while. So what if we were able to do something like this, where let's just create a temporary method as an initializer called new terms and conditions, for example. And what we'll do is Ruby has this nice thing where you can define a class method, and we'll call it new TC, and we'll pass in the terms and conditions and the covered product in here, like this. And then we'll call the initializer that's just above with the terms and conditions purchase price, the terms and conditions purchase date, terms and conditions effective date, and the terms and conditions expiration date. What's that? Thank you. Thank you. Effective date. I could not do this without your help. All right? Effective date. And the what?
The product. The covered product.
And the covered product. Yes. All right, covered product.
Probably at the end.
Let's look. Purchase price, covered product, purchase date. Not too happy with the sequence of these, so we're actually going to improve that. Okay. So then there's a little thing going on here that I just need to check to make sure that I'm doing this correct, because this is a high pressure situation for someone like me. Return self new, thank you. All right. So now we've got this new method that's kind of a layer of indirection for our constructor, right? So what that means now is that we should be able to come through here and replace every instance of the constructor with this new one. And we're still green. Nothing's failed yet, right? There's another test in here that also creates the contract, so we need to get the terms and conditions and the contract the same here. We're still green. We haven't broken a test yet. All right? This is not Penn and Teller. I'm not doing any magic deception behind the scenes here. So we could do this a step at a time, right? We could say, okay, now what we'll do is we'll actually pass in the real terms and conditions into the original constructor, because nothing calls the original constructor now. All right? And except for that one location. Where is that one? It's making me a liar. All right? In the initialize. All right, so if I go back to here, here, right? So just have to work our way through these to make sure they're calling the new one. All right, so something has happened that is unexpected to me. Looks like I somehow backed out some changes. Okay, so we'll pass in the terms and conditions, and then this is going to be terms and conditions, product. All right. Okay, so that's that one taken care of. And then we'll go to the next one. Here. And we need the terms and conditions for this. That's what we forgot to do, was copy in the terms and conditions line. So it doesn't know what to do with those.
And here you have the contract you forgot to remove it.
Yes, thanks. Thank you, Oscar. All right. And then this one is on line 22. This one has the wrong thing here. All right, so we're green. Okay, we're coming down to the wire here, so we're just going to finish this one out. So the next thing we can do, now that we're passing this through and it's all green, is we can actually pull in the purchase price from the terms and conditions for all of these. Purchase price, purchase date, effective date, expiration date. We're still green, okay? Now, we shouldn't need any of these other things anymore. Right? We should be able to get rid of everything from here. All right, terms and conditions, covered product. Don't need these anymore because the method signatures are not being passed through. We're green. So then the last step here, what would be the last step?
Pushing the change.
Yeah. Yeah, ship it. All right. So we just did not break any tests and completely replaced our constructor. Okay, done. All right, so we introduced, so let's just recap a little bit on this. Talk about a few things here. So some closing thoughts on this. In terms of loose coupling, cohesion, you can see we're driving towards those things, but we're doing it in a domain-informed way. We're changing the language. We're focusing on adding in things like value objects to not just enforce encapsulation, but also to enforce business rules around things like immutability, right? To protect ourselves from, like Jacoby was talking earlier about risk reduction. This is all risk reduction in my mind, is like reduce the number of things in the code that can change or be changed, right? That's what part of what value objects do for us. Lower coupling, higher cohesion. You can see that the code now is becoming more and more easy to understand, maintainable. What we could actually see here is like this limit of liability here doesn't really belong in the contract. Contract is an entity. We want to keep it as simple as possible. This should be moved to the terms and conditions, right? Another thing that maybe became apparent to you, I don't know, is the purchase price. The limit of liability should be based on there's two purchase prices in the domain. There's the purchase price of the dishwasher and there's the purchase price of the warranty. This one is 1,000, this one is 100. What do you notice in this code? Which one's it using? Yeah, it's like the purchase price should be based on the price of the product, but it's based on the price of the warranty, which is what we're now storing in the terms and conditions. So we really should have another, the purchase price should actually be moved. We should have two, one in terms and conditions and one in covered product, representing different concepts. So this is all about, so I mentioned limiting red, writing characterization tests. These are things that you can lean on. They just help my brain focus on only one thing at a time. And then the last thing here is focusing on communication and collaboration, right? Comprehension. So using tools like EventStorming to be able to inform the domain and tell us the things that you can't get from the code alone. All right? So I think I'm at time, right? So thank you very much.